every construct is going to apply to every object or event you encounter in the world. There's going to be a limited range of objects that can be construed through a kind of particular construct, okay? And again, so first place, these constructs have relatively wide or relatively narrow range of convenience. They apply to lots and lots of different objects, or they apply to only a few objects. And again, it kind of follows that superordinate constructs, very abstract constructs, will apply to lots of different events and objects. Subordinate constructs are going to apply to a relatively small range of events. To go back to my automobile example for a moment, if I construe something as a vehicle or a not vehicle, I can have rocket ships and bicycles can have that construct applied to them. If I construe something as a Buick or a not a Buick, only a very small range of cars can be, only a very small range of vehicles can be construed with that kind of construct. So range of convenience is really very important. Again, think about a person with a very monolithic personal construct system. Somebody who views the world solely in terms of good, bad, smart, stupid, male, female, or something like that. And every event you encounter, you got to fit into that personal construct system. I look at a chair, like I said, is that a male chair or a female chair? And it just doesn't work for me, right? So what I need to do is to have other kinds of constructs with maybe wider range of convenience that can be applied to other kinds of things. A comfortable looking chair versus uncomfortable looking chair, or something I like versus something I don't like, whatever it is. If you try to fit all of the objects and events you experience into a relatively small set of constructs, you're going to find yourself in the position of Procrustes. You remember Procrustes, the mythical innkeeper who had only one size of bed, and if a guest came in and was too short, he stretched him out so he would fit in the bed, and if a guest came in who was too tall, he'd cut off body parts until the person fit. Watch out, if you ever stop at a hotel and the innkeeper's named Procrustes, walk away. But that's what happens when you've only got a small set of personal constructs that you try to apply to the world. Paranoids have a small set of personal constructs that they apply to everything that they encounter in the world. We're talking about paranoids to the right, paranoids to the left, it doesn't matter. They all have the same kind of quality to their thought, which is there's a very small set of personal constructs that they apply to everything. A very small, a finite set of concepts that they use as a filter on all of their experience. The experience corollary. Here's as close as Kelly ever gets to talking about learning, though it would never occur to him to use the word learning, not to mention things like reinforcement or something like that. A person's construction system varies as he successively construes the replications of events, okay? So what happens is there's this event, and you categorize it. You apply some construct to it that provides information about what you can expect to happen next. There's a hypothesis. And then if it happens, if what you predict is going to happen actually happens, you say, oh, that was the right construct, okay? But if your construct doesn't make the right prediction, if you're surprised by what happens next or by what you find next, then what you've got to do is you've got to refine your personal construct system. You've either got to change the implications of the construct, or you've got to elaborate a new construct and add it to your system, okay? So you refine your personal construct system through experience, okay? And you do that sometimes by adding constructs. Oh, I got to think about things in a new way now. Add a construct. Or perhaps you find that a construct you used to find convenient doesn't work for you anymore. Okay? When you were in high school and you were the smartest kid in the class, that worked all right to divide your classmates into the smart ones and the stupid ones or something like that. You get to a place like Berkeley where everybody's just as smart as you are. That doesn't work anymore. You've got to figure out some new way to organize your acquaintances. Or maybe you refine definitions. So, okay, I guess that's not really what I meant by good or bad or whatever the construct is. You kind of figure out a little bit more what you mean. Or you might expand the range of convenience of a construct. You might say, oh, gee, I never thought of it, but this construct applies to this kind of event too. Or you narrow the range of convenience. You say, gee, I used to think this construct applied to everything. Now I understand it only applies to a relatively small range of objects. In one way or another, by virtue of your actual experience in the world, which is how you got your personal construct system to begin with, you are continually refining that personal construct system as you generate hypotheses about expectations and see whether those expectations are fulfilled or not. The modulation corollary. Here we get Kelly at his kind of linguistic best. The variation of a person's construction system is limited by the permeability of the constructs within whose ranges of convenience the variance lie. An almost unintelligible sentence. Okay. But what he means here is that there are some constructs that are easy to change as a result of experience. There are other constructs that are more difficult to change as a result of experience. Permeability of constructs, their susceptibility to change. If you've read your Piaget, what Kelly's talking about here is something like the dynamic between assimilation and accommodation. You assimilate a stimulus to a pre-existing schema, and you accommodate your cognitive schema to the new stimulus object. That's what permeability is really about. Some constructs are so useful, they're hard to change. Other constructs, they're easy to change. Core constructs, not so permeable. They're core because you use them a lot, and you use them just that way a lot. Peripheral constructs, probably more permeable. Superordinate constructs, not so permeable. Hard to change. They're very abstract. Subordinate constructs, easier to change as a result of experience. So you're modulating your personal construct system. Some parts of your construct system are more amenable to this than others are. And then finally, we get the fragmentation corollary. A person may successively employ a variety of construction subsystems which are inferentially incompatible with each other. Ordinarily, we would expect a person's personal construct system to be internally consistent. That is, the various constructs that he or she employs to anticipate events would fit with each other, would articulate with each other in various ways. That's what we mean. That's what we mean by the coherence. And for example, in terms of the hierarchical arrangement of constructs, we would expect subordinate constructs to fit nicely underneath, to be nested nicely underneath superordinate constructs. Think about, Kristen Taylor talked about this, I didn't, but Heider's balance theory, or Festinger's cognitive dissonance theory. We expect our attitudes to be in balance. If John likes Judy and Judy likes Steve, then we expect John to like Steve. We expect things to be in balance. Okay? Festinger's cognitive dissonance theory, if I say I like a task and I tell somebody else the task is bad, that behavior conflicts with my attitude, creates dissonance, it has to be resolved somehow. it wouldn't have occurred to Kelly to talk about Heider's balance theory, which he might have known about, or Festinger's cognitive dissonance theory. But that's the general idea here, that we expect our personal construct systems to hang together. But they don't always, okay? If somebody has an idiosyncratic personal construct system in which one pole is female and the other pole is bad, okay, that personal construct system is not going to, it's going to be highly fragmented. Things are not going to fit together very well. So that's what we would expect. And Kelly argued, for example, that maybe in schizophrenia, what we have is a very fragmented personal construct system by virtue of the thought disorder in schizophrenia. The thoughts that people have, the thoughts that schizophrenics have, don't necessarily make sense, don't necessarily fit with each other. But in normal mental life, we would expect some degree of coherence. And the commonality corollary. To the extent that one person employs a construction of experience which is similar to that employed by another, his psychological processes will be similar to that other person. Birds of a feather flock together. If people perceive an event the same way, they're going to respond to that event the same way. Every act of perception is an act of categorization. If people construe an event the same way, they're going to behave in response to that event the same way. So personal constructs are the key to individual differences in personality, but we are not just different from each other, we're also alike. We're also like each other in various respects. But what the dimensions that make for difference and similarity are not different trait dimensions of personality, but rather cognitive dimensions of personality. So if two people construe an event the same way, they're going to behave the same way in response to that event. Familiar example, the study date. Call up your boyfriend or your girlfriend, you say, hey, let's go on a study date. You know, I don't even know whether people do these kinds of things anymore, but back in the medieval period, people used to do that. And of course, one person wanted to study and one person wanted to date, right? So they had two different constructions of what's entailed in a study date, and those constructions would come into conflict. But if they had the same understanding of what's entailed by a study date, then things would go all right, because each would have accurate expectations about what the other one was expecting. Okay, so people are similar and different from each other in terms of their cognitions, in terms of their personal construct systems. Okay, in terms of what constructs they have, what poles of constructs they choose to emphasize, what the contrasts are in their constructs, and so on and so forth. The more similarity cognitively between two people, the more similarly we can expect them to behave. And then the sociality corollary. To the extent that one person construes the construction processes of another, he may play a role in a social process involving the other person. Here's the old adage: you don't understand another person unless you've walked a mile in his or her shoes. Okay, Elvis Presley song, if I remember correctly, but it goes back even longer than that. The idea that Kelly has here is you can't have a relationship with another person unless you understand how that person construes events. You can't have a relationship with another person unless you have some idea how they think, what their personal construction system is, and how they deploy that personal construct system, what whole of a construct they choose to apply, what the range of convenience is, and all that other kind of stuff. To the extent that you know that about another person, you can have a relationship with that person. You can play a role in a social process involving that person. But if you don't understand how the other person views the world, there's no basis for a relationship. Okay, you literally cannot get along because you don't understand how the other person thinks. Now, Kelly does not mean to suggest here that you can't have a relationship unless you think like the other person. You can. You can't have a relationship unless you know how the other person thinks. There's a difference between those kinds of things. You can be yourself with your own personal construct system, but you also need to appreciate how the other person thinks. That's what intersubjectivity is all about. That's what social cognition is all about. Being able to understand what the other person is thinking and feeling and desiring, not just looking at what he or she is doing. Okay? But since all of that emanates from or is determined by his or her personal construct system, what you have to do is understand what that is. And if you do understand what another person's personal construct system is, then you can effectively predict how he or she is going to respond. Okay? You do something, you turn to your roommate and you say, my parents are going to kill me. Okay? Now, the reason you say something like that is because you know how your parents are going to think. You have some sense of how they're going to construe the same event. Of course, they hardly ever do kill you, but the fact that you say things like that is just a manifestation of how you're getting inside somebody else's head and viewing the world the way they do. Okay, so how do you figure out what a person's personal constructs are? Kelly was a clinical psychologist. He spent his entire career doing psychotherapy and doing assessments. It was pretty weird, apparently, being a therapy client of Kelly's, because he wasn't like anybody else's psychotherapist. Other people would go to psychotherapists like, some Freudian therapist, and they'd lie on the couch and they'd talk about their dreams and they'd free associate various kinds of things. And other people would go to Carl Rogers type therapists. Rogers was at Ohio State at the same time. Just imagine what this place was like, okay? Carl Rogers, Julian Roeder, George Kelly. It must have been unbelievable. And Rogers would have people sit up and say, well, what do you want to talk about today? And the person would say, well, I'd like to take an axe to my mother. He'd say, oh, that's very interesting that you'd like to take an axe to your mother, and just kind of go on like that. And then people would go to Kelly, they get assigned to Kelly for therapy, and there'd be this guy speaking this Martian language about personal construct systems and all this kind of stuff. But Kelly invented a technique that he used to try to tap into people's personal construct systems, a technique that he called the role construct repertory test, because it was intended to reveal the repertoire of personal constructs that an individual held. And the role construct repertory test basically went in 3 phases, and you can do this for yourself. If you look on the lecture supplements for social learning, you'll see a whole list of the roles. This comes from a shorter version of the what's known as the REP test, because people can't say role construct repertory test too well. The REP test, this is a short version devised by Frank Beery, where there are roles, very abstract social roles. Yourself, a person you dislike, your mother, your father, a person you'd like to help, a friend of the same sex or of the opposite sex. You got to do one of each of these. A person with whom you feel uncomfortable, your boss, and a person you find difficult to understand. And the first task for the person is to instantiate each of these roles, to actually name a person in their lives who fills each one of these roles. Well, yourself is easy, okay? And then think of somebody you dislike, okay? Your mother, or the person who played the role of mother in your life, your spouse, or the person who plays that role in your life. They're kind of broadly determined. So that's the first thing you do. You'd actually instantiate each of these with the name of some specific person that you know. It can't be Mahatma Gandhi. It can't be Judas Maccabeus. It's got to be somebody in your actual life, okay? Then, what Kelly would do is he'd go through the list, and he'd pick out triads of roles, like a person you dislike, your father, and a friend of the opposite sex. And he'd ask people to identify some way in which two of these people are alike and different from the third. Okay? And then just to write down what that way is. Male, female, warm, cold, smart, stupid, whatever, good, bad, or whatever. And then you just kind of repeat that. Now, there are something like 25 different roles in the original version of the rep test, and if you're doing your permutations and combinations, that's a lot. 25 objects selected 3 at a time is a lot of combinations. So he just kind of do this for a while until he thought he had sampled the whole thing. And then what he'd do is he'd actually go back and have his clients rate each one of the people specified in each of these roles on each of the constructs. What Kelly tried to do there was to get a sense of what constructs the person applied, how is two people alike and different from the third, that's similarity, that's categorization, and also to try to figure out how varied, how rich, how many different constructs the person had. Okay, nowadays we do this statistically with factor analysis, but basically trying to get at what he called cognitive complexity, or the structure of things. So it's by virtue of this kind of procedure that Kelly tried to figure out what a person's personal constructs were, what categories the person used to perceive the world, and to generate hypotheses about what was going to happen. Individual differences in behavior are caused by individual differences in cognition. Individual differences in cognition are most easily represented by individual differences in categorization. So it's individual differences in categorization that lay at the heart of Kelly's thoroughly cognitive personal construct theory of personality. Okay, we'll take this same theme in a somewhat different direction on Monday when we talk about social construction. Thank you very much. Sorry to keep you a little late.